All right, so we got a little bit here to talk about following this Week 2 preseason action between our beloved Indianapolis Colts and the visiting Green Bay Packers. Real quick, though, watching the game, I just feel the need to point it out. Shout out Rick Ventori. What a gem it is for us as fans to have him in the commentary booth while the game's going on. To hear his perspective on Lou Anarumo and the defense and the way they're using some of the players. To get the perspective of a former defensive coordinator and a guy who's been deeply tied to the Indianapolis Colts for years and years and years. Just very cool, very insightful, not something that we should take for granted as fans to be able to get Rick Ventori's perspective. And I just felt the need to point that out. Of course, we want to talk about the quarterback battle. I thought we learned some stuff there, at least enough to push the discussion further here. But quickly, I just want to touch on the injury report, as that takes a little bit less time to do. And the Colts did, as many of you watching saw, rack up quite a few injuries. Of course, Hunter Waller, 7th-round rookie out of Wisconsin, playing with the ones at safety in the absence of Nick Cross. He got hurt, a foot, an ankle. We don't know exactly what it is. We'll see, but obviously he's a guy that's been making his mark felt as a rookie for this team, so that's going to be something to monitor. Blake Freeland got rolled up on, an absolutely brutal replay to watch. I'll tell you, one of the biggest risks that an offensive lineman faces is the exact type of injury and cause that Blake Freeland got, where you're just kind of in the play, someone comes up behind you and just kind of blindsides you and takes out your legs, not with any intent, but just in kind of the heat of the action. That type of stuff happens all the time and is very, very unfortunate. But Blake Freeland, a guy for the Indianapolis Colts, of course, we know the starting tackles in Bernard Raymond, who was out in this one, and Braden Smith on the right side, who I believe left this game with a groin. Blake Freeland was kind of one of a two-man competition in a swing tackle spot. Jalen Travis, the other guy who got a whole lot of time today, now a pivotal piece up front. We'll talk a little bit about more about him later on. Tyler Goodson, backup running back. Of course, we know Jonathan Taylor, and his role is cemented on this team. But DJ Giddens and Tyler Goodson, your two guys behind him. Tyler Goodson probably going to have a pretty decent role on this team this year. He left in what was some sort of an arm sling or something like that. And just the overall body language and the way they were walking him to the locker room, I didn't think looked great, but not a whole lot of clarity on what that is. And I think I might have saw Cam McGrone leave this one too, who was kind of getting some reps with the twos and spelling in with the ones at linebacker. So that's something to monitor as well. And then, of course, a slew of guys out already with some form of injury. Guys like Kenny Moore, Alec Pierce, Bernard Raymond, as we said, Jalen Jones, Juju Brents. But ultimately, as far as the injury thing goes, I don't know. It's always, as fans, right? We always get aggravated with the injuries, and we're so close to the team. It's hard to know exactly whether or not the Colts are more injured than other teams. Sometimes it feels that way, but I do think I saw something where they're really middle of the pack in the league with injuries, or at least nothing that is like noteworthy, right? I just feel the need to point that out. And then overall, again, it's hard to discuss the implications of the injuries because as of right now, we don't have a whole lot of clarity on specifically what those injuries are, right? Like it's not Madden where the guy goes down and then you go to your injury report and it says, sprained knee, 2 to 4 weeks or something like that. You're kind of victim to the organization in terms of what they're willing to share. And if I were them, I wouldn't, we're not owed the exact details of what's going on. And we don't right now know much about the timetables, which I feel shows really at least some level of optimism or hope that these guys may be ready early in the season, because if they were sure that the guys were not going to be ready for week 1, I would think they would indicate that. But then also at the same time, in not sharing, there is the other side of it where you say there's not nearly enough confidence for them to imply that they think these guys would be ready for week 1, right? So we don't know exactly where that stands. And that's what it is, right? So I don't want to overreact to what the Colts have here at injuries because week 1, a lot of these guys may be cleared. But nonetheless, it does provoke a level of discussion about the depth that we have in some of those spots where those injuries are, at corner, at safety, at tackle. And I have some other things I want to touch on from this game regarding the defensive side of the ball that I'm starting to observe between reports and training camp and what we've seen in preseason. All of that stuff coming, of course, after talking about the main event of the evening, which is that quarterback battle between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones and what we just saw. We'll talk about it all, but not before we introduce the show. My name is Justin. This right here is the Behind the Bench Colts podcast. As always, ask anyone watching and enjoying the show. Go ahead, shoot it a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Of course, subscribe if you want to be a part of the journey. We're on our way to 4,000 subscribers over here on the YouTube channel. So if you keep coming back, enjoying the content, perhaps it's your first day here and you say, just like you, Justin, I am a massive, massive Colts fan, and I want to be a part of any community that is trying to push the discussion further. That's ultimately what you're trying to do. You hit that subscribe button, you never miss an episode again. Audio listeners, of course. How can I forget about the audio listeners? Leave a five-star review. Let the people know how much you're enjoying the show. But most importantly, if you're in the comments section, be civil with one another. We're all rooting for the same team. No need to tear each other down. I believe they call that a little something called Hoosier hospitality. At least that's what I've heard. I don't know. Being a native New Yorker, it's not exactly ingrained in my blood. But what is ingrained in my blood from a very young age is a fandom of these Indianapolis Colts. And that's why we got to stop all of the housekeeping. We need to stop asking you to do things to support the show and instead get back into the regularly scheduled programming. So the quarterback battle, let's get into it. I thought both guys in this game overall looked pretty good, all things considered. I think Daniel Jones sort of showed a level of steadiness and a decisiveness early in that game. And we know the offensive line was playing against primarily backups in this one. And I know the joint practice, there were some breakdowns there, but whatever it was, we don't really know how it would go between the Colts and the Packers in a real game right now. We have no clue. And again, the Colts, I generally give the benefit of the doubt to up front. But the reason I bring it up is because Daniel Jones, don't get me wrong, he had his fair share in what went wrong with the Giants. But you do see a little bit of the positive sides of Daniel Jones in a game like this, and really an environment with all the Colts' first-string weapons outside of Josh Downs and Alec Pierce. But you had guys like Warren and Pittman and Taylor out there and a lot of the starting linemen. Jones, that's kind of the best supporting cast that he's had as a whole at any point in his career, what we saw him play with today. Now, of course, that was a very small sample size, but you do kind of see a world where, okay, it may not be the sexiest thing, but, can you get it done potentially with Daniel Jones if you had to? A game like this, I think, bodes very well in that direction. It's not to say they would go like 12-5 with the guy, but, can you kind of do the old Gardner Minshew 500 type, give or take 2 games with a Daniel Jones? I thought he showed enough to prove that, which means also he showed enough to make it where there was a little bit of pressure and a little bit of urgency on Anthony Richardson. One of the things I thought going into this game is that when it came to the quarterback battle, all you needed was enough of a reason to put Anthony Richardson in week 1. I don't think it's a matter of whether or not they want to start him. It's simply a matter of whether or not they have enough reason to do it without getting questioned about the fact where essentially, they're looking at Shane Steichen and saying, hey, man, you used the word consistency. Richardson hasn't shown this consistency. I'm talking about when they were talking about how they were going to decide who their starter was. Richardson really just has to give them enough reasons to not be questioned. I think ultimately that's going to be all it takes for him to get this job. But again, I bring that up because Daniel Jones, I thought at least made it where, okay, Richardson's going to have to at least come out and play pretty well. And I thought, good news, he did. I mean, the first drive for Richardson in this game, very strong. I thought he looked very relaxed and settled in the offense. And I thought did not only a good job of identifying easy completions, but putting the throw on the money as well and being decisive in doing it. I mean, just even little things in terms of managing down and distance. Like there was one where he dropped back and just boom real quick to who was it? To Drew Ogletree. There was another situation where I just looked and said, hey, that was kind of a decision he wasn't making last year in terms of and again, small sample size, I know, but encouraging to see kind of just hey, let's identify what those easy things are for us to do and then execute them. I thought Richardson overall did what it is that you would want from him on that first drive. The second drive, a little not quite as good, but certainly nothing egregious. Overall, I thought a very solid performance from Richardson. The type of performance where I think that getting the second half, because you see, he started, what was it, 5 of 7, and then he ended up 6 of 11. So you kind of had a really good drive and one that didn't go quite as he wanted it to, although he didn't look bad by any means. That's why you have to watch and not just pay attention to the stats. But it is the type of performance where it wasn't so good that you can assume it would have been a great game, but it was good enough to say, hey, he could have really solidified that into a real good outing with a second half to define it. Ultimately, we didn't get that second half, right? But I bring that up not because I think that's what they should have done or what they were ever going to do, but instead to kind of bring up the fact that I don't think either of these guys played quote unquote good enough to bring real what clarity, right, to the quarterback position. But again, as I said, what's it all about for the Indianapolis Colts? All they're looking for is enough of a reason to justify putting in Anthony Richardson. And I think that's what they got. Mike Chappell actually on Twitter was just looking at what those guys at the press conferences were saying. He said, longtime reporter for the Indianapolis Colts, very reputable. He indicated that Steichen mentioned that that a decision is coming very, very soon, and we went one step further. Him and I believe Destin Adams and a couple other guys, maybe just those two, said that you kind of got the feel from listening to Steichen at the post-game presser today that he knows who it's going to be, and it's just a matter of maybe sleeping on it or doing his due diligence and having his conversation with Carly Ursay-Gordon or telling the players and the team before telling the media. So I also think Steichen has his answer. I think it's Richardson, and I think we'll know it by Monday. That's my prediction for you because, again, he played good enough in this game to justify putting him in week one. And again, I thought showed a level of comfort, even if in a quick, small sample size, that has to make you feel pretty good, particularly when you're just talking about being better than what he was last year in a year that, I mean, there must have been so much going on. You know, one thing people don't consider about last year, of course, he's a young guy, and of course, he doesn't have a whole lot of reps, and that's one side of it, but also just how overwhelming it is to be an NFL quarterback, coupled with the fact that at 22 years old, it was his first year of fatherhood. And obviously, I mean, I'm not a parent, but my brother is. And you know, we've talked about kind of what that looks like for him and just the amount of time that requires and the amount of sleepless nights. Richardson probably had an overwhelming 2024, to say the least, the likes of which can really harden an individual. And you hope he took some very important lessons from that. But again, I do predict for you. That's really a digression entirely. I predict for you that by Monday, if not early tomorrow morning, we're kind of going to know what the deal is here with the Indianapolis Colts at quarterback. And it's going to be an announcement that Anthony Richardson will be the starter week one, which means we'll ultimately get the backups in week 3 of the preseason. This, of course, is not an actual report. This is a prediction just based off of my brain, right? Other things I noted on the offensive side of the ball outside of the quarterback battle, it felt like a lot more play calls from under center in this one than we saw last year, at least in the sample size. I like that a lot. It's one of the things that I thought was you know, if you were the coaching staff and you were coming out of the season and saying, what are some of the things we could have done better after last season to get this offense going? Well, I think that Jonathan Taylor is the type of running back that operates way better under center when you can actually have him move not laterally, but up and down, north and south, right? And a shotgun, even if you're running zone formation or zone, I don't want to speak out of pocket here. When you're running out of the shotgun, let me not pretend I know more than I do. When you're running out of the shotgun, a running back a lot of the times is required to move laterally a little bit more before just kind of going north and south, right? When you're behind the quarterback, you kind of get those initial, that head start. That stylistically, I think, is something that fits Jonathan Taylor's game much better. And, you know, I kind of like to see that. You know, with Anthony Richardson last year, I felt they went shotgun so often because you have a guy who can run. You have a guy who's kind of, you know, the teams kind of get caught up in this kind of college type offense where you're running shotgun, this modern offense, right? Where it's kind of built around your quarterback's ability to run the ball. I'm a little old school in that regard. You listen, man, why don't you force AR to be a quarterback, put him under center, play under center like a fucking pro, and you can either do it or you can't. I think he'll be able to do it just as fine as Daniel Jones, right? I mean, come on now. Let's treat this guy like a professional and do what works best for the bread and butter of our offense, which is the running game. I think they're going to be quite happy if they do more snaps under center. I think Jonathan Taylor, when he's operating behind the quarterback, a lot better than when he's operating next to the quarterback as a runner. Neither here nor there. Next up, Jalen Travis got a lot of work with Freeland and his season-ending injury. Jalen Travis played most of the game, and he's a big piece here now. And he's a guy that when I looked into him after the Colts drafted him, saw a lot of parallels actually between him and Jordan Mailata, if that's how you say his name, Jordan Mailata. He's a tackle with very similar tools, very similar physical stature. I say it's relevant because Mailata was a guy, fuck, I can't say that name for shit, was a guy that the Eagles drafted while Shane Steichen was the offensive coordinator under there, and they've spoken very highly about him in media availabilities when possible. I've heard his name come up quite a bit, both from Shane Steichen and from Tony Sparano. So I think they like what he brings to the table. But he's a guy 6'8", 300 plus, super athletic, a little bit raw, but is physical, has all the tools. Again, almost projects exactly the same as a prospect as Jordan Mailata did. And as we know, that's a Pro Bowl excellent tackle in this league. Um, Travis seemed to already have a good handle on the swing tackle job. And I think that bodes well for kind of what we perceive his readiness to be. And I thought he handled himself pretty well out there. There was really no moment where I thought he was getting the work today. Against backups or not, I mean, he's a backup himself. So I would have to say all good on Jalen Travis. I quite like what I saw out of him today, actually. Another guy to mention, real quick, let me get a sip of water on here as my throat is so dry right now that I'm kind of forgetting how to speak English. I don't think that's what a professional does, right? Would people normally edit that out? Whatever. Who cares, right? We're just talking football. What does it matter? So Anthony Gould is a guy that listen, training camp was an indicator. They kind of not only is he a guy that they like what he can do, but he's a guy that they actually sort of move around as a piece. Like you kind of have him as a moving part in a lot of plays, and he has a knack for making plays. Like he was the guy who caught that nice pass that was called back in that offsides lineup by Adonai Mitchell, but Gould is a guy who makes some plays. I think his hands have been a little suspect throughout the preseason and training camp. But overall, if he could kind of get that figured out, he's a guy that can definitely bring a lot to an offense. I think you have 6 receivers making this team. I don't think they're going to choose between him and Doolin. I think they're just going to have both of them on the roster. And then speak of that receiver position, my final observation is AD Mitchell. That offsides obviously damaging. And there was one where, and it was really kind of, there was another one where I think he got called on a holding that I don't want to speak out of turn, right? Because A.D. Mitchell is very talented. He's more talented than I've ever been at football. But I thought the holding that he got called on or the illegal block, whatever it was just a case of kind of like, just looked like a lazy block to me. And the little things continue to plague him as a player. We know the talent that he brings, but to really be a consistent contributor, he's going to have to start doing the little things right more often. And those are the things that essentially are probably less fun and less engaging to him. Like A.D. Mitchell loves being lined up on a guy and making him look silly, but A.D. Mitchell has to love blocking and getting physical, both in terms of catching the football in traffic and, again, as a blocker and doing all that stuff. He has to learn to love that just as much as the flashy stuff that he can do in one-on-ones. And I'm not sure if he's as engaged in those things right now. I don't think it's a sign of poor character. I just think it's a sign of like, part of his growth, I would say is the fair way to put that. Still like what I've seen from him, but just something to observe. Defensive side of the ball, let's take the shift over before we get out of here. I keep rubbing my nose. I apologize for that, but my allergies are killing me right now. Right off the bat on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, how refreshing is it to see the all the different pre-snap looks from Lou Anarumo? I mean, to see kind of each and every play, you're looking and saying it looks a little bit different this play than it did the play before. Of course, that's not every single down, but you get my point. Just very refreshing to see what it is that Lou Anarumo is bringing to the table as a defensive coordinator. Chris Lamons, a guy that was obviously, I mean, if you were watching the game, he was one of the winners of the night, right? Because what an important piece he could potentially be for this team with all the injuries at corner, with Jalen Jones and Juju Brents. Kenny Moore was out. I mean, way to take advantage of an opportunity. Chris Lamons, he was a guy, listen, that has been around now for 2 years on this defense, and I thought he looked pretty damn good last year in relief. Kenny Moore had missed a game or two, and he came in and was a nickel guy, and I thought he looked pretty damn good. I like Chris Lamons, and I was kind of upset when he wasn't projected to be kind of someone that was on the roster coming into this year, particularly when training camp started, but now it seems like there's a real path to him being on the roster. A game like this might have solidified his position. We'll have to see. I still have some concerns on the defensive side of the ball about our interior depth behind DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart. Those two guys, when they are not on the field, and I know they're great players, so of course their impact is going to be felt when they're on the field, and you're going to lose it when they're not there. But the run defense, the difference in the run defense when they're not on the field again against backups on the other team is is prominent. It's very prominent. And one of those things, you just look at the personnel right now and you're just not sure, do they have the beef on the inside? It is a little bit of a concern I have. The depth on the defensive interior in regard to run stopping. I think in terms of like a NASCAR pass rushing set, I think you kind of have the guys there, right? In JT Tulamalu, in Taekwon Lewis, and Kwity Paye, and Samson Ebukam. Like, I think you have those guys. But, Tim Smith and Ayad Abari as your backup defensive tackles, Neville Gallimore, another guy obviously in the mix. Do I love how that projects as for stopping the run in the case that Buckner or Grover is out? No, particularly when I know that a priority of the linebacking room outside of Zaire Franklin is going to be how a guy can cover, right? So that's not exactly about having a hard-nosed guy there. It is a little bit more about having a guy who has some versatility to cover against the pass. The run defense is something that I think health is going to be very much required, as it was last year, for that thing to stay together. Speak of that linebacker spot, Joe Bacci, I do like quite a bit. He's a guy who's been making a name for himself in training camp. Of course, we know he came from the Bengals. He has familiarity with Lou Anarumo. He just seems to find himself in the right place at the right times for this team. And I think Jalen Carley's right now in a boot. So you look at Joe Bacci and say, next to Zaire Franklin, he's a guy, a lot of people look at the linebacker spot and people think you have to have a star and a name that you know at every position. Look at the Eagles last year. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but there was a lot of questions about that linebacking room last year. Zach Baun came out of nowhere, was one of the best linebackers in football. He was an all-pro. For Zach Baun to get that look, someone did have to take a chance on him, right? Someone had to put him out there at linebacker. And Zach Baun, even maybe not to say that Joe Bacci is better than Zach Baun, but what I'm saying to prove the point, Zach Baun, there was probably even more reason to be nervous about his inclusion in the Eagles lineup last year, if you look at the context prior, than a guy like Joe Bacci. Zach Baun was a guy that wasn't even a linebacker. He was converting from being an edge rusher, and he didn't have a lot of time in Vic Fangio's scheme. Joe Bacci, on the other hand, has 4 years of experience with Lou Anarumo and was behind good linebackers. He wasn't behind scrubs. So I think Bocce's a guy you got to feel pretty good about. Carley's, it seems like you can't rely on his health right now. Well, all right. I think between Bocce and Cam McGrone, I think you and Austin Ajake, or whatever his, however you pronounce his last name, I think next to Zaire, I think it works. I'm not going to lie. I think that works at linebacker. I think I'm pretty comfortable with where they stand right now there, all things considered. We'll have to see if I'm right, and we'll go from there. Position maybe I'm not as confident in terms of the depth is safety. Without Hunter Waller, if he's to be out, Daniel Scott was the guy taking meaningful snaps. And listen, more power to him. Happy to see Daniel Scott out there. He's a guy, 5th-round rookie out of Cal a couple of years ago, missed 2 straight seasons with a torn ACL and a torn Achilles. This is his first time even making it to preseason action, from my understanding. So to see him out there making a couple plays, I believe he even took Julian Blackmon's number 32, if I'm not mistaken. All right. I mean, we'll see. Hard to rely on a guy that's been that injured, but that's where we're at. And outside of Rodney Thomas, Daniel Scott is kind of the guy if Hunter Waller is not there. And we'll kind of see what that looks like. But he's a guy who seemingly is an important piece of depth right now, and they're putting a lot of faith in him. Whether or not you agree with that, it doesn't really matter, right? Because that is what it is. And then outside corner, obviously we know Jalen Jones and Juju are down right now. And then, of course, Justin Wally, the fellow Justin, what a fucking shame, tears his ACL after really being a standout in camp and OTAs and all that stuff. He's out for the year. Well, all right. We see Jonathan Taylor. We see Jonathan Edwards out there. We see Alex Johnson. We see Samuel Womack. These are names that we can put out there, and they know how to play the game of football. It's not that they don't. They're professionals. But is that ideal? I don't know. I mean, we saw Womack play some nickel again, as did Lamons. And I believe Lamons, they both played a little bit outside as well. They're both guys that were on the team last year, and both guys that I did appreciate kind of what they brought as depth pieces and as fill-ins last year when they were needed, which was probably a little bit more often than we would have liked, as potentially is the case right now and moving forward. But again, is that ideal as your second corner on the outside, on the other side of Mooney? Probably not. But I do like those pieces a lot better if you can get the health of Jalen Jones, Juju Brents, either one or both of those guys. And then at that point, Lamons and Womack are guys that you know have played a lot of reps and you can trust, and you know that they're not going to just completely screw the pooch. They at least know where to be, right? That's half the battle. But again, probably neither of those guys should be your number 2. So those were all of my takeaways from that game. I think we have a quarterback decision coming up. in the next couple days. And at that point, preseason game 3, which is a weird way to say that, that game will have nothing to do with the quarterback battle anymore, and we'll see what they do. And then we'll be on our way to the regular season. But until next time, my name is Justin. This right here was the Ryan the Bench Colts podcast. And as always, go Colts.